I'm usually pretty lazy about writing out my thoughts, but I rushed to get this one out before one of the dozen-and-a-half Frostleaf fans throws a brick through my window. So, Frostleaf finally got a model, and it seems a lot of people want to see me talk about how bad she is. I will do no such thing. If you want to see someone cheat on Frostleaf, go read her skills. Hyperglyph took a bigger dump on her than I ever could. I wanted to start out by saying that the extra attack and defense on the model is irrelevant because it's on Frostleaf, but it actually makes a difference. With her model installed and a high enough level, an E2 Frostleaf can actually do more DPS than Midnight. Don't think about pointless things like skill DPS or enemies with more than 0 defense, that's cheating. There are 2 Lord models for now. 10% of attack is added as arts damage on hit, and gain attack speed if 2 targets are in range. Gaining extra attack speed is great for Frostleaf, since it would offset her talent crippling her attack speed. The DPS increase isn't relevant, but the reduced attack speed on talent damaged both of her crowd control skills. Her skill 1 has an SP cost of 3, but because of how her attacks line up, her attacks start just as she gathers 3 SP, so she has to wait for an entire extra attack cycle before she could use her skill 1. Effectively, her S1 has an SP cost of 4. She also has a similar problem with her S2. Because her attack speed is reduced, she gets less binds overall, which reduces the power of her skill. Having the condition be 2 targets in range isn't ideal, but at least she can offset her talent sometimes. Wait, she didn't get that model. She got a DPS model that gives her 10% of her attack as arts damage on every hit. Well, surely the talent upgrade will remove the pointless demerit of her talent. It doesn't. It just gives her a small chance to apply code. I think someone in Hyperglyph has a hate boner so massive that if they lay down and think of Frostleaf, China will have the world's first space elevator. To be fair, it's not like extra attack speed versus 2 targets would be that useful on an operator that specializes in single target crowd control anyway. So how much value is the 10% arts damage? The model effect is really powerful. It does 10% of the operator's attack, so it scales with attack up skills like Silvergun S3. Attack up, huh? Frostleaf has no such weaknesses. With the model, she has an attack of 710, so that's 71 arts damage per hit. 71 arts damage per hit. Now I'm sure you're all very impressed by such a massive 2-digit number, but let's give it some context so we can wrap our heads around it. Frostleaf has an attack interval of around 1.35 seconds, assuming you have her full pot. That means that every 1.35 seconds, Frostleaf does as much arts damage as 70% of the damage Blue Poison's poison does every second. Staggering. In order to pad this video, let's see how that damage looks in practice in comparison to some other Lord Guards. Before we move on to the last effect, I want to say that none of this should be taken as criticism of how AG designed her model. The reality is that Frostleaf is bad because every part of her kit is bad, and making anything close to a good operator from her would require giving her the single most broken model the game has ever seen. Since that wasn't going to happen, going for flavor and adding arts and a code to the operator that allegedly has arts and has Frost in her name is reasonable. Alright, disclaimer aside, let's finish this shit. The final effect is that all of Frostleaf's attacks have a 25% chance to apply the Code debuff to an enemy for 1.5 seconds. Code does a bunch of shit, so let's break it down quickly. It reduces the attack speed of the target by 30. If the target has Code applied to them already, when they have another Code applied, it freezes them. This is functionally a stun with a cool animation, but it also reduces their res by 15. They will remain frozen for the same duration as the Code debuff. If another Code debuff is applied while they're frozen, it does not extend the freeze. You can, however, reapply the freeze with 2 Code debuffs while the target is frozen. I saw a few questions if Frostleaf can freeze stuff on her own. Her Code duration is 1.5 seconds, her attack interval is 1.35, thanks to her ASPD talent, so she can barely do it herself, even without her skill 2. The only chance she has to freeze a target is directly after the attack that procs Code. 25% chances in a row, so her chance to freeze is 6.25% for any 2 consecutive attacks. That sounds a bit worse than it actually is. In other words, when an enemy has a Code debuff, she has a 1 in 4 chance to freeze it for 1.5 seconds. So how much does this help? Well, the first thing I thought of was using the Code debuff like I use Moose, the ASP reduction and freeze to help tank something I couldn't tank otherwise. The RNG makes this an unpleasant idea though. On average, her Code and freezes will reduce the target's DPS by a certain amount, but in practice you will get periods where she doesn't reduce the DPS at all, and periods where she reduces it far too much. If we have to resort to freeze and debuffs to tank something, then our target must have extremely high damage. Therefore, this inconsistency will likely lead to the death of her blocker, without great RNG. I would first try to exhaust every other more consistent option, things like Roberta, swapping bodies with fast redeploys, not blocking at all and relying on things like Ethan and Indigo. Even the horror of Deep Cow RS2 is more tenable. In short, it's a positive in theory, but getting real practical value out of it would be difficult. The Code also benefits her original role of stalling enemies a bit. Well, sort of. There is a minor exception. Even if ranged enemies have the same movement speed as melee enemies, they tend to move slower because they stop walking to attack. If Code lowers their attack speed, they will attack less often and thus walk forward faster. This is an incredibly minor factor that isn't worth considering in practice, I just thought it's funny to mention. If she lands 2 Codes in a row, she freezes enemies completely for 1.5 seconds. This is especially potent with her S2 since it reduces her attack speed. With her Code duration, only the first attack after a Code proc can freeze, but thanks to her S2, now the second attack can also... the first Code proc times out before the third attack hits. Fucking space elevator, man. Dong-based technology aside, her S2 still improves her Code procs by keeping the enemy in her range for longer and increasing her attack speed. How much does it actually help though? For a rough comparison, I styled Patrick with Frostleaf, S2 5 times with model and 5 times without. I also used other low rarity crowd control as a control group. Here is how I set it up. Patrick has to walk a bit less than 3 tiles. Operators are set up to only style him in those 3 tiles. Without interference, Patrick will take roughly 6 seconds. I noted down how long it took him to cross the distance with a variety of slowers and subtracted his normal walking time from it. Every attempt was done at 2 times speed. My measure was very rough, but it should be plenty to give you an idea of how Frostleaf compares to other slowers. I will now read out the times from worst to best. Frostleaf skill 1, wet module, 3 seconds. This one is actually closer to 2.5 seconds, but I'll round it up. Orchid skill 1, 5 seconds. Pudenko skill 2, 8 seconds. May skill 2, Indigo skill 2, 11 seconds. Frostleaf skill 2, average time with module, 11.6 seconds. Frostleaf skill 2, average time without model, 11.6 seconds. Frostleaf skill 2, best time with model, 12 seconds. Frostleaf skill 2, best time without model, 13 seconds. Earth Spirit skill 2, 15 seconds. Ethan skill 2, 22 seconds. That concludes the results. The reason I had Patriot walk such a small distance was to bias it in favor of Frostleaf. Her skill 2 has a massive 50 SP cost, so she can never use it more than once. Ethan, May, Pudenko, Indigo have a much shorter skill cycle and could likely get a second skill off if the distance was longer. In fact, you can see that Ethan was less than a second away from getting his skill off a second time when Patriot crossed the finish line. While Frostleaf is better at stalling with her model than without, the difference is statistically meaningless. I would need hundreds of runs before I get a measurable difference. Finally, I would have liked to discuss Frostleaf in relation to other operators that apply code, but I had a few problems. Gnosis and Aurora can do it on their own, and everyone else is in Frostleaf's boats of being sorta RNG, so either you use Gnosis or meme around with RNG. I don't have the freeze ops, so I couldn't use them together, but there is a problem that came to mind that maybe somebody in the comments can answer for us. Kiera's code procs are 2.5 seconds long, Frostleaf code procs are 1.5 0.5 seconds long. Isn't it wasteful for a Kera coat proc to be eaten by Frostleaf's weaker freeze? Given that she is unreliable, are the extra coat procs worth the lowered freeze durations? I suck at math and don't have the tools on hand to manually test it, so I'm wondering if somebody with experience knows the answer. That's it for Frostleaf. Next video is on Caper.